This is the Content Strategy Insights podcast, episode number 164. To this point in the history of content management, most work has been done in systems where content authoring and the ultimate display of the content looked pretty similar. Now, with the arrival of decoupled systems that assemble content elements dynamically, often from a variety of sources, new practices are emerging to orchestrate these complex and abstract experiences. Remekie started a company to help enterprises manage these new challenges.
Welcome to the Content Strategy Insights podcast, where accomplished content strategy experts share their wisdom with our friends in the content community. Our mission is to democratize content strategy, to make its principles and practices accessible to everyone. And now, here's your host, Larry Swanson.
Hey everyone, welcome to episode number 164 of the Content Strategy Insights podcast. I am really excited today to welcome to the show Remekie. Sana is the CEO and co-founder at Conscia. Conscia is one of a new emerging brand of companies that helps us deal with this crazy new complex world we're in. So welcome, Sana. Tell the folks a little bit more about what you do there at Conscia.
Thank you so much, Larry, for having me. Pleasure to be here. Conscia actually comes from the word consciousness. That's kind of the origin of the name Conscia. And the reason why we named our company Conscia is that data and content in this complex landscape is coming from a whole bunch of different systems. And data and content is what constitutes knowledge at the end of the day. And knowledge is what you need to gain consciousness of what's really happening in the outside world around you. So the idea behind Conscia was that we would allow content and marketing teams to be able to build experiences with data and content, and essentially the knowledge that is residing across various systems and various APIs and various backends. So that's kind of how we named our company. That's sort of the core to who we are.
Nice. It's a great name. And you have to explain how to pronounce it with just another chance to engage with people. So that's a good thing too.
Conscia, yes. I've heard lots of different pronunciations, Conscia and even Conscia, which doesn't even actually spell that way. But it's a little bit different name, so it is a little bit hard for people to figure out how to pronounce it. But if you think of the word consciousness, I think that's the easiest way to think of the spellings, at least.
Yeah, I like the way you talk about getting the knowledge together that people need. And the reason that you need a company like yours to do this is that we live in this increasingly kind of decoupled modular world of composable microservices. And right there, so there's a whole new batch of buzzwords. Can you talk maybe a little bit about the context, for the need, for maybe
Sure.
the founding story of your company?
Yeah, absolutely. So, if you look at the world a few years back, maybe even a decade back, there was a rise of systems called digital experience platforms, right? So that's or DXPs is the three-letter acronym for that you would hear about. So you think of players like Adobe, Salesforce, Acquia, etc. that marketers would use to essentially build and orchestrate experiences, specifically on the web channel. That's where the DXPs came from. And DXPs actually evolved from web CMSs. So the word web in the CMS means that the experience that you're building was very much page-centric, right? It was web-centric. DXPs were really just the evolution of that, because what you needed was not just a CMS, but also the ability to personalize the experiences. You wanted analytics on what's working, what's not working. So these large, all-in-one players either bought a bunch of capabilities from other smaller players or built their own capabilities to provide an entire comprehensive suite for marketers and content editors to be able to build experiences in a very in this comprehensive fashion. Now, what happened in the recent years is this trend towards best of breed or best of need type of solutions, where DXPs, as good as they were, any monolithic application at some point gets too big and gets sort of unfocused, so to speak, on specific capability, right? So players like Contentful and Content Stack started to emerge as CMSs that were best of breed, that were very much focused on structured content without having to worry about where that content is going to be displayed at the end of the day. So they wanted to start to decouple the content itself from its presentation. And then the term headless came into play, right? So we're decoupling content from presentation. So the same content could be delivered to the web, it could be delivered to mobile, it could be delivered to your TV, connected TV apps, et cetera, and IoT. So with that trend towards headless, a lot of other types of capabilities also started to emerge that also wanted to decouple themselves from the presentation, such as commerce. So then you start seeing, commerce tools, elastic paths, VTEX, et cetera, that now not only want to decouple the content, the core structured content for marketing from the front end, but also product information, also, capabilities like checkout, et cetera. So with this trend towards headless and decoupling, essentially, what ended up happening is a whole bunch of new systems started to come on board, and you'll see in the MarTech landscape now you have over 10,000 different applications, point solutions that each do very specific things, but a lot of them, I would say about 3/4 of them, are trying to do that in a very decoupled sort of fashion. So with this trend came the need to essentially unify all of these various technologies to create an experience that is not fragmented, that is continuous and connected across devices, across channels, but also something that connects to all of the various data and content sources coming from all of these different backgrounds. So that's where we found Conscia. Conscia is essentially, the brain. We call it the brain of the composable stack, right? So you're composing your digital experience from a whole bunch of different backend services and data and content. And what Conscia does is provide that one place where it all comes together. And so that marketing teams and content teams have one system to go to orchestrate an experience across any channel.
Yeah, and as you say that, I probably shouldn't go too far. I'm picturing like the human body as a metaphor for this with the brain, and then the various senses, and then the activities that you do. Anyhow, I won't go down that rabbit hole.
No, that's exactly the point. The analogy works no matter which way you come at it.
Yeah, and I love also that you talk about that it's for composing experiences. I think a lot of people in content come from like publishing and journalism and media, where it's been more about publications that and a lot of us are now in content design and, working with digital products and feel that, but I still think there's a little bit of a vestige or legacy of the old, kind of WYSIWYG editors and that kind of thing. That doesn't play in this world, right? We're
not as
about,
easily, not as simply. And I think that there are different vendors are trying to come at this problem in slightly different ways. In fact, I have my own webinar through Digital Experience Community to discuss all the different ways in which presentation is being controlled in a composable stack. And again, what a composable stack is when you have different capabilities of that are required within the digital experience space coming from a whole bunch of different systems, right? So you have a CMS, you have a PIM, you have a commerce engine, you have a loyalty platform, you have a CDP, so a CDP customer data platform. So all your data and content's everywhere. So who owns the front end, right? Where should it be the CMS? Should it be the commerce engine with its own, sometimes they come with their own templates for product discovery and, category landing pages, et cetera. So who actually owns where that experience comes together, right? CMSs, a lot of them, even the headless ones now, want to have the CMS be the center of the experience. A lot of the commerce engines believe that if you have an e-commerce website, then they should be the center of that. But the problem now is that we're living in a composable world, right? And there isn't really any center anywhere, because depending on where you come in at, the center changes.
Yeah.
Essentially.
You're reminding me, like, I remember 25 years ago when the web first came along and I was doing some SEO, and I quickly realized that it was pre-Copernican, that we were all the center of our own universe.
Yes.
And we've come right back around to that with this. But I'm curious now about, like, you obviously are doing something with your software, but it does kind of make sense that, like, if you're a publisher, that the CMS might be the center of this universe. If you're a merchant, the commerce platform.
That's right.
Is that sort of how it's sorting out, or are other considerations as well?
There are. So one of the considerations is that why don't we make nothing be the center, and why not have a tool that allows marketers and content teams to assemble content from all of these different places, outside of the CMS, outside of the PIM, outside of the commerce engine altogether. So Gartner recently came up with this term called digital experience composition. And the idea was that if you're building JavaScript focused, front ends, JavaScript based front ends, then, you let's say you want to build a landing page and there's a header banner that comes from a CMS and some products that you want to include, like featured products that come from a commerce engine, some offer that comes from a loyalty platform. Why not give, marketers of almost a WYSIWYG way to compose pages, essentially, by pulling content and data from all these different systems. So that's definitely a concept that is playing out. There are platforms like Uniform that are in that space. You have Kazoo.ai, you have StackBit, Netlify is coming. Netlify actually just bought StackBit for that reason. But if you look at the way all of these technologies are thinking about composition, it's still very much web-centric, right? So it almost feels to me like we went out of the world of the web from the DXP to composable and headless. And now, marketers realized, wait, how do we preview what we want to publish before we publish it? We need to be able to feel confident that what we've created is actually what the customer is going to see. So Gartner then went back and created this new category, and a lot of these vendors started to align to that. Now, Conscia comes at this slightly differently. What we realize is that a lot of the larger organizations, and we play in the space of $1 billion plus revenue type of organizations, they have very strict standards when it comes to design, right? They know what their pages are going to look like. They know what the layouts are going to look like, what the branding is going to look like. And really the only thing that the marketers and content folks want to control is what fits into the slots of the page. And if it's not a page, if it's not web, if it's mobile, what fits in these different designated spots? They're not really going outside of the of what is allowed, the guardrails, essentially. So do they really need WYSIWYG, or do they just need a way to designate content contextually to specific parts of the experience?
Yeah, that's one thing that occurs to me as you're saying all this, is that in cases like personalization, where you can't really preview that. You can preview it abstractly and conceptually. And it's sort of like composed on the fly. Or these composition tools, do they let you kind of preview like generic,
Yes, I completely agree. And so 90% of the time, if you're looking at especially e-commerce types of organizations, 90% of the pages or the experiences are very much structured. We know exactly what these experiences are going to look like. What are all the slots? within the frame that the customer is looking at. And it's only about 10% of the pages, like landing pages, campaign level, experiences that may have some free form, unstructured sort of allowance to them, right? So what Conscia is focusing on, and what digital experience orchestration, as opposed to composition, focuses on, is that 90, or let's say, even if we, worst case scenario, 80% of the experiences that are out there that are structured for the most part, and where the data and content needs to come from a whole bunch of different places to make it happen. And an example is something like a homepage, something like a category landing page, right? Or product detail page. A product detail page is actually a perfect example where you cannot preview the page in advance. You have, let's say, 1 million products. You have the inventory coming in at from different locations. So you have different databases holding on to locational inventory. You have pricing that is specific to the customer, let's say in a B2B scenario, for instance. So how, as a marketer, how do you preview that for every single customer before you roll it out, before you publish it? So that type of an experience is generated by stitching together content and data from a whole bunch of different places in real time, right?
You're getting... I'm wondering now, as you talk, all of a sudden I'm thinking, because I've done all my work in this kind of thing has been in big enterprises, but as you're talking, I'm like, is this down to where like SMBs and other smaller, or is this still an enterprise thing, or how far down the company size are we going here?
Definitely. So that is a big part of the decision-making process, like which way you go. I actually believe that if you are a very small business or even a mid-sized business, WYSIWYG type of capabilities they become a little bit more important because there is less rigor in terms of how the content and data needs to come together. There's a lot more there's a lot more I would say autonomy given to the marketing teams and the day-to-day operational teams to build these experiences together, whereas in larger enterprises, that's all predetermined and premeditated, right? There's teams that just work on your design systems. There's teams that just look at structured content. There's content engineering, content operations, content design. Like there's all these teams that have their own jobs and they're all figuring out their own end of the world. So really, orchestration should be a lot more streamlined in that case. Whereas when you don't have all of that and you just give the marketer the ability to just go freehand, build a page, they have a lot more power. And that only really happens in small to mid-sized businesses. And I believe that, I may get in trouble with folks on the other side, with the composition side of the world, but I do believe that capability is for up to mid-sized businesses, or for that 10% of the pages or experiences within larger enterprises where you're not dealing with structured content anymore and structured pages anymore.
Yeah, that's because I know that's always going to be I've seen a lot of very clever and creative things being done to permit the kind of creativity that marketers want, but they'll always be figuring out something that can't be structured or automated, which, great on them. But hey, you've talked a couple of times about experience orchestration, and I think a lot of, especially as we're making the transition from like monolithic CMSs that just spit out pages, which is still a lot of people's experiences, to this notion of experience orchestration. Have you had to help people across that sort of, there's some new like mindsets and skills that come with that. Have you helped people with that?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a ton of organizations at this point that are moving from the DXP world to get them basically future ready, right? They all, everybody's trying to go composable, but no, and not a lot of organizations, I would say, know what's the right path. And what I've seen done a lot of times is kind of the opposite of what should be done. When you're going from legacy or monolith to composable, the idea is to really decouple the experience, right, from your CMS and to your front end to the CMS essentially. But what I've seen done a lot of times within organizations is that they've recreated that monolith in the headless world, right? So they've started to create HTML and CSS, like include all of that, the code essentially, right in the content structures themselves. So now what you have is this content type in, let's say, Contentful, which is one thing called the blob, the HTML blob. And now your whole page is designed inside that HTML or CMS or CSS, right? Like what's the point of that, really?
Yeah.
So we've seen that happen a lot. And I think that organizations are realizing that they went down the wrong path. And now they're trying to figure out how to decouple everything that they've done, even in the decoupled CMS.
Exactly.
No,
that's the exact reason I asked about that earlier, was that that's like the classic thing, the classic WYSIWYG legacy is like, and human beings will always hack any system to do what they want to do. And so, I mean, you could just put in like prevent them from putting HTML in fields. But, and I know that one thing about that, I have seen, this kind of gets into like more education for authors in particular about semantically meaningful information in a database, in a CMS versus like presentation level. Have you had experience with that?
Yes, and I have, but I think that we're at the very beginning of realization at the enterprise level that there is a problem, that they've created a problem, and it is all about education, right? It's about it. What I see a lot of times when I post something, or when you post something, or others within the field, other thought leaders in the field, they're starting to talk about the mistakes that we've made and how to reverse those mistakes. The leaders within the digital teams, they look at this education that is happening, and you've done a good job, like over 160 different episodes already of all the knowledge that is in your head and in your guest's head that's kind of going out there. That is what it's going to take to really turn the tide and help digital leaders see what's the right way forward, because I think a lot of us have gotten ourselves stuck in this bind. We've done things the wrong way. We, of course, as humans, also don't want to admit that we've done things the wrong way. We think that we've bought technology that is headless, so our experiences should be headless, right? Because that's what we did, right? We bought. It's almost like when you buy a treadmill, right? And you have all the plans to work out and become healthy. And you go buy yourself Peloton or some treadmill, and you think that just because now you've bought this new equipment, you're well on your way to becoming healthy, right? And that's actually not the case at all. In fact, I think you don't need any of those things initially to get on the right path to be healthy. There's just these incremental steps, and it's the mentality that needs to change. You have to start thinking from a process standpoint, that this is the future that I want to build for my company. I want to structure all my content. I want to structure my experiences so I can reuse that structure everywhere. So once you start to think that way, you're well on your way already, and then you can bring in the right tool to help you be more effective at that.
Yeah, you're reminding me as you talk now about, there's also the tailless CMS. It's kind of how I think about it. Like there's this opportunity at the other end, but I think to this point, like authoring has just been considered like a data entry thing in the CMS. Whereas I've done some enterprise content work where there's and this is like really common in a lot of places, mostly in HR and stuff at this point, but the enterprise user experience design is kind of taken hold and helping, like, people like content authors have a better experience, with their job as well. Has that come up in your work or in your systems or world, or?
Yeah, and I think some of those tools to kind of help content authors understand what that final experience is going to look like is, it is what was missing in some of these headless platforms that came about. It's very abstract, essentially, right? You have to get used to this abstract way of thinking, almost use your imagination a little bit to design content structures that are going to fit within an experience that you're hoping to create, right? And so and as I said earlier, DXC was one way to do that, but it only solves the problem for smaller organizations where you don't have that type of rigor. And experience orchestration is, in my mind, a way to help these marketing teams and user experience design teams to think in that abstract way by creating these constructs that are experience oriented, right? So we have a header banner. You don't need to look at what it's exactly going to look like in every single scenario, but you know that this header banner is going to get its content from a specific CMS, but you could change which CMS it gets that content from in the future as well. So that layer of abstraction, but also tooling around it to help people think in that abstract way without becoming too rigid and becoming too concrete in the way they think of every single page and every single experience. That I think is going to be the future.
We definitely have our work cut out for us there, I think. Hey, Sana, I can't believe it. We're already coming up close to time.
Oh my gosh!
But
wow.
I know it always goes way too fast. But hey, before we wrap, I want to just give you a chance. Is there anything that's come up in the conversation, or that you just want to make sure we talk about before we wrap up?
I mean, nothing too big, I guess, in particular, but one of the ideas that has been circulating is, when you think about content, we talked about content and data coming from a whole bunch of different places. Is there a reason to essentially combine and unify that data and content before it is published to the front end? So for marketers to be able to see all of it in one place, or should they just leave it where it is and then completely think in the abstract way to build that experience? So there are two different, I guess, lines of thinking. You're from the knowledge graph world. And so just to tie things back to the idea of knowledge graphs, the idea is that you want to connect and relate all of this content and data in this graph, and then that graph could then be exposed essentially to the front end to get all of its, all of the content to be displayed on the front end. And the other way of thinking is, in some cases, it actually doesn't make sense to put everything into a graph. An example would be what I spoke about earlier, where inventory for different locations is different depending on who you are, where you're coming in from. The inventory of a specific product is going to be different. So when your experience is very contextual and dynamic, and decisions have to be made to show something to someone based on who they are or where they're coming from, in that case, a knowledge graph may not be the right place to pull all that information, right? So I think it can literally take an entire new podcast to just talk about knowledge graphs versus, API orchestration.
I just did a talk last month where I talked about, and I think I would love to talk to you more about this actually, because I was talking about content orchestration versus experience orchestration.
Yes,
I think that's one way you could label that thing you were just talking about.
That's exactly it. Exactly. Experience orchestration is contextual, right? There are decisions to be made in real time about what to show to who, when, and where, whereas content orchestration can be done offline, right? Because you already know the rules by which content is related to other content in other places, right? So I think that idea is actually quite fascinating and needs to be teased out a little bit more, because a lot of people confuse content orchestration with experience orchestration, for sure.
Fun times. We're right at the start of this. Hey, one very last thing, Sana. What's the best way for folks to stay in touch if they want to follow you online or connect?
I think LinkedIn is my friend. that's the best way to get a hold of me. DM me or comment on one of the posts or podcasts that I'm on, and I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, so I'd definitely be happy to get in touch.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Sana. Really fun conversation.
Thank you so much, Larry, for having me again.
Thank you for listening. If you can think of a friend who might enjoy this episode, please share it with them. And please join us again for our next content strategy interview.